So first off, I'm Randal Schwartz, and I'm one of the principals for Wireless 2020. We're a broadband wireless consulting company. We work with operators all over the world. We've worked with over 120 operators in just about every place in the world to help them develop technology strategy, network strategy, market strategy, service plans. So really answering the key strategic questions of how do we go and be successful in the wireless business. And really what our particular expertise is and what we're most well known for is building business cases. So all this stuff is all really interesting, but how do we actually go and make money at that? So because of this, this is why the MulteFire Alliance turned to Wireless 2020. With working together with the marketing committee, we put together a white paper looking at a couple of specific cases, but particularly focused on what's the business case around MulteFire. So we've kind of had here, let's make sure we're going in the right direction. So key trends, so sort of what's going on, and part of what we do is keep our finger on the pulse of the market, you know, what's happening, you know, what's interesting, and right now, you know, again, I'm always fascinated. You know, we're gonna have to go any further than this morning. You know, coming in on the train, and basically our basic stance in society today is you know is like this. So you know, just look up and down the train. That's what everybody's doing. So tremendous challenge for the MNOs to sort of keep up with this incredible demand. And this near ubiquitous demand for always being connected and always being you know able to do the things that you want to do on your phone or otherwise. We look at IoT is starting to invade almost all business processes, so that you know one of the main features of the show, certainly becoming key here. And so as you look at this, and as the MNOs are challenged, not only in super competitive markets, you know, always coming up with the latest phones, the latest features, the latest services, extremely competitive, but basically a flat ARPU. And yet this ever-increasing demand, if anybody actually went to the Samsung 9 release on Sunday, really very interesting. But as you look at all of these AI features that are added, you know, I mean, just because that's the way my ears are tuned, I look at this and think, you know, this is just going to crush the network. So when we ask ourselves, how could the capacity continue to go up like this? You know, everybody's already sort of spending all their time on their phones. You know, it's these features that will just continue to drive demand. So as you look at that, the MNOs are challenged to keep up with, in this sort of flat and competitive environment, ever-increasing capacity, and that means ever-increasing CapEx for them. So, you know, more and more, I think that we'll start to see this model of shared networks. And so people being able to deploy infrastructure that maybe instead of putting out the CapEx themselves, the operators actually buy capacity. So that's really interesting in that it introduces new technology and new business models that people can take advantage of. And this is part of what MulteFire is really well targeted at. License spectrum and costs, you know, continue to close off opportunities for alternative providers that want to look at this. And so again, MulteFire being in unlicensed and in shared license bands, you know, makes that much more accessible. We always look at these new technologies from a standpoint of how they impact businesses, and you look at something just as an example, you know, the old LNDS business model, you know, whoever remembers that, not that we want to, you know, give away our age here, you know, a great idea, but at the time the technology really wasn't ready for it. Now these models are starting to come back because instead of delivering 20 megabits per second to a rooftop of a building, if wirelessly you can deliver, you know, 5 gigabits per second, suddenly these, you know, business models now come back and make sense. So we're always looking for those interstitial points where you add new technology. And new kinds of strategic private networks can be built for targeted industries. And again, you know, we were just talking about that some. So, you know, I'm not going to go into the technology and the strategic part. We already heard about that. But from a business case advantage, you know, why is MulteFire going to be interesting? So it creates business advantage into taking advantage, that takes advantage of these strategic technology differences. And in the use cases we look at, we'll try to be specific at focusing on how. It takes advantage of the volume production. A lot of the technology is comes out of the core technology of LTE, which of course from a cost standpoint has been driven down the cost curve, so we can piggyback on a lot of that. So it has a lot of advantages over maybe other proprietary technologies that are being brought to market. When you look at the coverage advantage and the capability to provide lots of bandwidth, it can reduce CapEx and OpEx, and we'll go through some examples to really quantify that and see what that looks like. Using unlicensed spectrum takes away that need for, I want to start a new business, but first I have to invest X number of millions of dollars just to get license, to get a spectrum license. That always makes it a lot harder to sort of look and pursue new opportunities. The managed network capabilities, which is just innate in LTE networks, that provides us capability to be flexible, add new services. And also, what becomes important at any time we're talking about any kind of shared infrastructure or that kind of implementation, being able to provide multi-operator capability, so that maybe I can go into a building where maybe it's not worth it for one operator to go and put in an infrastructure, but if I can, maybe as a third-party neutral host, put a network in there that then I can sell to all of the operators, that creates a new model and a new business advantage. So, these are the things that MulteFire can bring to the table. So what the MulteFire Alliance asks us to look at, we picked 2 use cases, and these are only examples. There are many, many use cases that can take advantage of the new capabilities brought by MulteFire. Case 1 that we'll talk about is a harbor private IoT network. In the study case that we looked at the port of Singapore, one of the biggest ports in the world. And then 2, we wanted to look at an enterprise office building, and the study case that we looked at is 590 Madison Avenue. So this is a 40-story office tower in Manhattan. So these are interesting in that they're sort of interesting cases here. One is an IoT case, really focuses on IoT. The other is more of a mobile services case. The first case and the harbor case is what we'll refer to as a closed network, meaning that all of the devices only have to talk to the infrastructure, whereas case 2 is an open network. So we probably want to communicate with phones in everybody's pocket, and that adds in a whole other set of challenges. So these are the 2 use cases that we talked about. So first we'll go through case 1, and we'll look at private IoT networks. Number 1, what are some of the advantages? Why are we going to be interested? Number 1, they're enterprise controlled, they're closed networks, they're independent networks. There's no obligation to the MNOs, and with the architectures that we're implementing, a harbor or the case that we were looking at before, a manufacturing plant, they can deploy this network and really operate it to their heart's content. High performance, we talked about what's brought from a coverage and a capacity standpoint, and the latency need, that's all inherent in the LTE technology, which is being brought to bear here, and flexible deployments and the security that comes basically with LTE. So all of these things are inherent in LTE, and the implementation in MulteFire makes it easy to get those advantages. So we're looking at the harbor IoT case, and so number 1, we have capacity as one challenge, and how many sensors is it that we're gonna want to deploy? And as you get to any of these IoT networks, what are we going to do with it? What kind of sensors? How much capacity demand do we have? That's one of the key things that we want, and we'll talk about what some of the assumptions are of what we think we're going to do as we're in the harbor. Coverage. There is signal blockage because we've got containers piled up, we've got cranes all over the place, we've got moving vehicles, so challenges there, and LTE and its capabilities, implementing MIMO, those are all well suited. Mobility with low latency, and again, lots of stability in the network because this is really a very dynamic environment. All of those things can be brought to bear. So here's our use case, and for those who have been to Singapore, this might not be the part of the city that you visited, but for almost 16 kilometers along the Straits of Singapore, and if you come in from the Singapore airport, basically this is the other side of the water that you're looking at as you drive on the highway coming into town. It's a vast area, and you can, it goes really as far as this picture goes. It's one of the largest, ports in the world. The total coverage area that we used in the business case analysis, and to do the business case analysis, we used the WIROI tool, so that's Wireless Return on Investment, and that's our business case tool from Wireless 2020. It kind of allows us to very quickly build a business case model of almost any kind of wireless network. So in this case, we're using it to look at the port. We have key inputs into it, which is, a total of 20 square kilometers of coverage area that we have. They have berths for 65 ships. The port holds a total of 37,000 ships annually. So if, as you fly into the port of Singapore, you see, literally hundreds of ships that are just anchored out in the harbor waiting to come in and offload, and a total of 32 million containers that pass through the port annually. So anybody that wonders, what Singapore, why is Singapore there, and why does Singapore seem to have so much money? They've been at this for a couple centuries doing this kind of stuff. So that's the reason why. So that's kind of the outlook of it. And what are some of the things that we might do? And again, this is not based on a requirements document that came out of the Port of Singapore. There's some testing that China Mobile did in the Port of Shanghai that looked at some of these things. But this is a list of some things that might be done. So asset tracking, maybe we want to be able to have an RFID sensor on each of the containers so we know where they are, how they're moving around, when they've been actually shipped out. Transportation and autonomous vehicles. The plan would be that they have autonomous vehicles, driving around, maybe with containers on them, maybe just delivering whatever. Environmental sensors, communications with arriving ships, where they can send information to sensors, on land as they arrive, and what their what their requirements are, what they need. Video and surveillance, another thing. So one of the things that probably stands out as you look at this list, it's really a mix of high band and low band applications. And so as we've looked at this, and when we get to the technology comparison, in this particular case, we're looking at MulteFire versus Wi-Fi. Now you say, well, what about something like LoRa, a dedicated use case? Well, if some of we have high capacity demands on some of the sensors, maybe that's not the best fit. So that's part of why we picked those two in particular. So as we look through this, we're like, okay. And I have to be totally honest, this is based on some information we tried to extrapolate from some of the testing that was done in the Port of Shanghai, but we needed to have some kind of metric of how many IoT sensors might there be. So first we looked at the number of berths, and that's going to give us some measure of how much traffic and capacity is running around the port, how much communication do we have to the ships. So we counted about 50 devices per ship, and don't think of it as draconian as well. Each ship has 50 sensors on it. We're just trying to come up with a reasonable measure. The number of boats that come in, there might be 100 boats that are docked in any one day, and that's about 20 devices per boat. So there might be 2,000 devices there that we have to talk to. Each container has a sensor on it. So we come up with something like 180,000 sensors that the network is going to have to come up with. Now, in the model, we track how much traffic there is. We made an estimate of how many high capacity sensors there might be, how many low capacity sensors there might be, and basically it sort of showed us that, particularly with LTE, the capacity wasn't really that much of an issue. Oh, this showed up really well. Oh, terrific. Well, I don't know if we can change the colors or not. But okay, so these are the assumptions that we made, and now I'm just going to get myself in trouble here. But again, these are the two comparisons that we made. We compared MulteFire to 802.11ac, so to a Wi-Fi deployment, and basically for range, there was about a 2x So on range, it was 200 meters versus 100 meters for Wi-Fi. So that's an important difference. On capacity, it was about 100 meters to, it was about 100 meters compared to 100 megabits per second to 75 megabits per second. Cost was about 3,000 to 2,000. And so the number of coverage units that we got, because of the difference in the range assumptions that we made, we had to put out about 275 MulteFire small cells to cover the Port of Singapore. That seems a reasonable estimate for us. So again, these are just some of the key assumption differences that we made. And so when we look at it as a result, when we look at the CapEx, that broke down to about 50% savings for MulteFire versus Wi-Fi, a lot of it driven by the need to be able to deploy so many fewer coverage. And on the OpEx side, over a 10-year period, it also was less. So we're looking at site maintenance, site utilities, some support costs, the transport costs for sending information back and forth, and some of the again, some of the organizational costs for being able to support that. So again, based on the assumptions that we've made, if you had to go and deploy a network, and what this isn't looking at is some of the softer benefits. So when we look at additional operational savings because of the capability to inject, new kinds of services, again, just beyond the numbers of the dollars and cents, there are probably other organizational efficiencies that you get out of MulteFire in this particular application. So,
quick question: why does MulteFire have better coverage than Wi-Fi? Because of power transmission, or is it they operate in the same band?
So they operate in the same band. Part of it is the radio capability of LTE. Part of it is the allowed power band. But what we went through, and amongst the committee, that's what we agreed was a fair assumption. And I think particularly in the Shanghai port case, that's about sort of what they were seeing. So that's the assumption that we used. So that was the harbor example, and we want to go and look at the office example. So here are some of the features that we might focus on of where MulteFire is bringing benefit. Flexible deployment, and again, because of the unlicensed spectrum, it could be deployed by the building owner, the enterprise owner, the MNOs, or it might be deployed by a neutral host, a third party who wants to come in and deploy the network. So MulteFire can enable all of these business models. Multi-operator network, multi-operator support. So particularly important when you look at this, our sample case is a 40-story building with multiple tenants in it. So we're probably going to assume that the population of that building looks pretty much like the market share of, in this particular case, the New York market. So if there are 6,000 people in the building, probably about 2,100 of them are Verizon users, and then we've got the AT&T users and the Sprint users. So to provide multi-operator support, you have two choices: either support all of the spectrum that all the operators want supported, and if you go and talk to a DAS vendor who has to put a system in this building, how many spectrum does he have to support? 8, 10, 12, it depends. Each building is a little different, but that's very costly. And then when you look at, where on the other hand, MulteFire is, can you find one neutral spectrum that everybody can support? And that's one of the main goals and one of the main benefits of looking at MulteFire. And again, you get the same flexible deployment and security options. So here's 590 Madison Avenue, beautiful 40-story building, 40 floors, a total of 93,000 square meters of coverage that we have to cover, and there's 6,250 people that work in the building. So here we're providing indoor mobile coverage. We assume that there's Wi-Fi support in the building. We assume that each tenant office probably has Wi-Fi coverage, and the building owner may additionally provide Wi-Fi support in the public areas, like in the lobby and in the parking lot. We want to have multi-operator support. In this particular case, we're looking at from the viewpoint of a neutral host that's going to put in the network and then be able to get support from each of the MNOs for their subscribers. So here's what's interesting about what's happening in the indoor space, one of the most important spaces for us in particular, something that we're really very focused on. The demand becomes, more and more critical. At the top of the tier, when we're talking about large venues like really big office buildings or airports or stadiums or shopping malls, the operators are very glad to support that. But as we get to the middle price, so middle-sized buildings, smaller office buildings, and the hospitals, hotels, probably doing something like putting in a DAS network becomes particularly expensive, one. And two, the operators aren't as enthusiastic to participate to help put in networks. So when you look at MulteFire and look at how it improves the cost economics of that, that's super helpful. So the value proposition, as we're looking at it in the enterprise case, cost savings both on CapEx and OpEx, the support for multi-operator operation, managed network capability to facilitate the support and be able to monetize the network, and then network security. So those are some of the things that we're focused on. There could be a revenue stream out of this, and some companies here that that I can see in the audience, this is a business model that they like to pursue. There's models that in certain cases where the operators are very willing to participate, and other models where they basically say, well, you're on your own, or hey, Mr. Building Owner, if you want to rent that space, you better make the investment to put a wireless network in. Otherwise, probably nobody's going to show up to rent your building. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics, not only on the technology side, but on the business model and sort of the market dynamic side. So if you could go and, you could go and derive a revenue stream, what might it look like? There could be a CapEx participation from each of the MNOs, say, hey, pay so much of the original CapEx to go and drive that in. There might be a monthly fee. You might have them pay for capacity. Maybe there is no monthly fee, but you just have them pay on a capacity network. What we're seeing is there's lots of interesting models out there. So in this particular case, one of the assumptions that we had on the private IoT case was we're focused on cost. We weren't looking at revenue in that particular case. Here, revenue might be part of the case. So as we look at this, we compared DAS, a typical LTE deployment where here, we're assuming that there are 4 MNOs that are where we have support in the building. In a typical small cell case, you might have to put 4 sets of small cells all over the building to support all of the operators. And then when we get to the MulteFire case, we have this one sort of neutral spectrum that everybody gets support in. And so you have to put in far less infrastructure. And in fact, it's sort of, again, we were talking about bending the business case back in line and putting the puzzle pieces in place. As you start to look at a CapEx investment for the office building that's less than DAS and is less than typical LTE small cells, now new kinds of business models might be available. And similarly, we looked at the OpEx, and in particular where you have to put a bunch of small cells out around the building to be able to support basically a 4x infrastructure, one for each of the operators. Our OpEx is a lot higher. And so in this particular case, we can see up to 70% OpEx and up to 70% CapEx. So, being able to support a single infrastructure for all the operators could be a key advantage here for the building and really enable this to be deployed and to be deployed successfully. It provides a significant CapEx over that, and the operational support, through security and managed systems, gives you the capability to add new services. So, we think MulteFire is really interesting, especially the way that it plays into what is, some of the key trends that we see happening in the industry, the capability to develop, a high-performance LTE-like network in unlicensed spectrum that provides, all kinds of new possibilities. We sort of did, and again, this is just a demo of a couple of different use cases, but the capability to deliver real economic savings and potential, revenue streams and monetization. And, so to provide, again, these are just a couple of examples, but, if we apply some of the same principles to lots of other different kinds of cases, then we can see where MulteFire can really be an interesting technology as it's deployed. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.